So, anyone see any good movies lately? I finally sat down and watched Scott Pilgrim vs. the World after all these years, and that ended up being an absolute blast of a popcorn flick. But anyways, welcome to Master Trainer, and today we're talking about everyone's favorite big green flying Pokemon from Gen 3. No, the other one, not Rayquaza. Anyways, here's 5 things that you probably didn't know about Flygon. Number 1. Alright, I'm going to try to make this as non-confusing as possible. So you know Salamence? You know, Big Blue Dragon Boy? Well, apparently, that was actually supposed to be called Flygon originally, and Flygon was originally supposed to be called Salamence. Why the name changed during localization then? Well, according to my research, it's because those in charge of translating Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire simply caught the two Pokemon mixed up. Number 2. So speaking of names, Flygon also has a nickname, the Desert Spirit. However, the explanation for this name varies depending on which game's Pokedex you're reading. For example, in Pokemon Ruby, it's also known as the Elemental Spirit of the Desert, and is implied to just get its name due to surrounding itself in sandstorms it creates with its wings. However, other Pokédexes from other games elaborate that this name doesn't come simply from the sandstorms itself that it creates, but rather from the sounds that Flygon's wings make in the midst of said sandstorms. And in Pokemon Shield Pokédex, it is simply said, it is nicknamed the Desert Spirit because the flapping of its wings sound like a woman singing. Number 3. On the topic of Gen 3, let's talk about the gym leader Norman. As you can guess by his name, he specializes in normal type Pokemon. Yet, for some reason in the Pokemon Adventures manga, Norman comes into ownership of a Flygon at one point. Then, through a series of events, it actually ends up winding up in the hands of minor rival character Wally. Seriously, this is just a really weird little thing, and Wally hardly ever uses a thing, but I think it'd be cool to have seen this play out in some way in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Number 4. Despite sharing many similarities with dragonflies, its name even being an arrangement of the words dragon and fly, the actual design of Flygon is not based directly on an actual dragonfly. Instead, it's more so based off the antlion, which grow long wings as adults and are best known for appearing in dry and sandy habitats. Number 5. To end off, here's the coolest thing I've learned about Flygon recently. According to longtime Pokemon series artist Ken Sugimori, Flygon was originally going to have a Mega Evolution in Pokemon X and Y. However, as much as he wanted to make such a thing a reality, a case of artist block meant that he was never able to settle on a design, and thus the idea was scrapped during those games' development. But anyways, that's it for this video on the green flyboy himself, Flygon. What Pokemon should I cover in the future? What's your favorite Pokemon region? Let me know in the comments below. So with that, remember to subscribe to Master Trainer, and I'll see you next time.